Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from today. My name is Vanita Pandey, and I'm excited to welcome you to what promises to be a lively, no holds barred discussion on the hottest trend in identity, payments, and fraud for 2025. Now, let's be real for a moment. In this industry, buzzwords are flying around faster than a phishing scam in your inbox. From embedded finance to generative AI, everyone's claiming to have the next big thing. But are these trends truly groundbreaking, or are we just slapping fancy labels on recycled ideas? To help us separate wheat from the chaff or the bullshit from the bullish trends, I am thrilled to introduce two industry heavyweights. First, we have Jason Howard, the CEO of CAF, a company at the forefront of identity verification, fraud prevention, and making sure the fraudsters don't have too much fun. Jason, welcome to this webinar.
Thanks, Vanita. Good to be here with you and James. Excited for the conversation.
And joining him is James Neville, the CEO of Yaspa, a trailblazing fintech that's rethinking how we approach payments and customer experiences. James, great to have you here.
Yeah, lovely to be here too. Looking forward to it.
All right, so we're going to dive deep into trends shaping our world in 2025. Is embedded finance actually as seamless as it sounds, or will it leave us with more subscriptions than we can count? Will generative AI save us from fraud, or generate new ways to steal our identities? What about self-sovereign identity? Revolutionary or just blockchain's next PR campaign? It's going to be a fun session, so lean back, smile, and let's get started. So, Jason, maybe just as we get started, let's kind of get a quick introduction from you. James, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm James Neville. I'm the CEO of Yaspa. I spent nearly 30 years in payments. I've seen the growth of everything from Amazon as a baby bookshop all the way through to where we are now. I used to be the CTO of WorldPay before it sold to Vantiv in the US. So also been processing lots of transactions for places like Just Eat in my days and Sporting Bet. So I've kind of been both sides of what I call the acquiring fence. I've seen the fraud happen as an acquirer, and I've seen the fraud happen as a processor. And actually, our business set out to fight both fraud and friction online in a payments context. So lots of stuff to say here, lots of stuff to engage on. I'm looking forward to the debate.
All right, Jason, over to you.
Yeah, perfect. No, thanks, Vanita and James. Yeah, Jason Howard. I'm the CEO of CAF. I've been with CAF for a little over 3 years. Prior to that, I was with a company called Ethica that was acquired by MasterCard in 2019. And so like James, I've been in the fraud and payment space for some time. So, and before that, time at JP Morgan, and before that at a fraud provider. So really have had a great opportunity, and it's been a wonderful career to kind of be involved in such a dynamic space. So excited to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
And as you say, Jason, we're living in very interesting time. Lots changing.
Indeed.
The world has totally transformed in the last 2 years. So let's get started. I want to start with my favorite topic, embedded payments and finance. So let's get into payment, innovation, customer experience. But why embedded payments? It's promises to make life easily by integrated transactions directly into the social, platforms like social media, e-commerce, marketplaces. It takes away the reason to think, add, fat finger your card numbers in there. So there's a lot of convenience. So James, let's start with you. Is the evolution of convenience, is it real, or are we just walking blindfolded into regulatory chaos and unexpected overdrafts?
Not sure about chaos. If you're talking about unexpected overdraft, I think the kind of buy now, pay later movement has definitely created lots of challenges with credit, certainly for a younger generation. If I'm going to buy something at JD Sports or my new Nikes, then paying in 3 parts and not being aware of kind of the debt mountain that I'm supposed to get myself into, I think that's a burning issue for the coming years. But payments has always been about simplicity and kind of being seamless and frictionless, and we've tried our hardest over the years to make that easier and better. So you tokenize a card, you pay with Apple Pay. Two very different things. Tokenizing a card has obviously present lots of challenges. If you lose that data, that's why PCI DSS exists. But the more we move towards payments that can just be triggered with a double tap on the side of your phone, I think that's about as good as the experience is going to get, aside from just winking with your right eye. I think payments everywhere is a thing. We're now seeing kind of a lot of the explosion of kind of C2C type businesses, C2C type commerce. You're seeing people pay for things on chats. You're seeing effectively what is the evolution of what PayPal set out to be. But payments are ubiquitous, yet they should be seamless and transparent. They should really exist in the background. The payment itself is, we talked before, it's a transaction, it's a movement of some digits. Actually, the real value is the identity behind that transaction, behind that money. And we'll talk about that later, but principally, Apple Pay and all of the kind of methods of open banking payment, pay by bank, Apple Pay, Google Pay, they're all driven by identity and biometrics on your phone. And the more we've kind of moved into next generation biometrics, whether that's your vein, your finger, the vein across your forehead, identifying you, the quicker that's going to become and the more seamless it will be.
So you're bullish on the trend. You believe payment evolution is going to continue. Jason, let's come to you. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm bullish as well. Look, I think this is just the next stage in the evolution from where we started, right? When you think about how e-commerce began and then you saw the movement to mobile, then you saw this massive acceleration in trends with all things associated with COVID during that period of time in the pandemic. Look, and then you see the emergence of developing markets like India and Brazil are great examples of that, right? Where you see more and more people are coming into the mobile economy through the phone, right? Not through the web, but through their mobile devices. So then now the question is, well, how do we make this as easy and secure for people to kind of pay? And as James mentioned, more and more payment mechanisms. You see that with Pix in Brazil is a great example. UPI in India, again, kind of coming back to those two examples. But even just like for me, which of my credit cards am I going to use? Which of my wallets am I going to use? How do I have this all embedded so I can just move quickly? I think that's something where it's just you saw it with Amazon's one-click checkout. It was a great first start in that journey, and you're seeing more and more of those examples kind of coming through. So, and I think that technology is going to only make it more secure and more convenient as this continues. Now, overdraft challenges, Vanita, I don't know. That's going to get down to the consumer. Does this mean more subscriptions? 100%, because businesses are moving to more and more subscription-based models. So, but that's where you're going to see more, again, technology working to kind of solve that problem for the consumer.
Yeah, and I remember when e-commerce launched, we used to joke. I used to be at a big card network, Visa, and we used to joke that we have converted every customer into that card entry operator of the 70s, where you'd call someone by a phone and they'd enter the number. And so we've come a long way. So I completely agree with you. We're bullish on this trend. I think it's going to continue. Let's move to the next piece, right? Payment is the last mile. A lot of companies, you look at Google's and others, they just want to own that piece, right? That's where the desire, the search history, everything comes to fruition. So what are your thoughts on personalization in payment? Gen AI promises to know your preference better than you do. It can suggest products and things you didn't even know you wanted or needed, like those neon sneakers some of us bought at midnight, and other things. So I think just think about it, like, by how often, how your pupils dilate, how long do you linger on a particular ad. There's a lot of information that's being passed on. So Jason, let's start with you. Personalization in payments, bullish, bullshit?
Bullish. I mean, look, you've seen these trends kind of come along with something as simple as paid search and the amount of data that Instagram knows about me based on my recent searches and activity and how those ads pop up in my other searches. So look, that technology's been there. Now you kind of move into what I believe is a new revolutionary wave, which is the AI wave, right? So it's probably gonna be a little overhyped in the beginning, but I think it's gonna be just as revolutionary as the internet was, as mobile was, right? That is only gonna make more amount of information be available. Now, I think what will be interesting is, what does the consumer ultimately find valuable in that? Like, where is the noise? Is this too much? I don't really want this. I just want to keep this simple. And I think that's where the balance is going to be for industry to make sure they kind of really get this right. But it is about convenience, right? So when I'm in my Instacart app and I forgot to buy a specific thing, and Instacart reminds me, hey, you usually buy this. Do you want this? Like, that's convenient, right? And then that naturally translates down into payments, right? Which is my preferred payment method. What do I typically want to use for these transactions? I don't, just make it easy for me. And I think you'll see more and more of that kind of behavior. So I'm 100% bullish on this, but I do think there's real risk in consumers being annoyed, right? This is just too much, too many options, too much stuff. Like, turn this crap off, right?
So that goes back to my question. So James, as you answer this, think about it, put the critical hat on. Are we on the cusp of hyper personalization that I would appreciate? or is it just targeted advertising 2.0 with better buzzwords?
I think it's dependent on the context. If you're buying your neon sneakers, and I'm assuming you're on like one of the Nike apps or something, and your nice sneakers yesterday, that there's a context there where suggesting choice can be helpful, but it's very narrow. So if you buy through a particular card network, then they've got data on you, but they don't see across the card networks and they don't see across the banking estate. Personalization really happens true personalization when you know depths of information about somebody or something. And I think cards are not really set up to do that. The card transaction in itself is like, there's $100 on a Nike store. It doesn't tell me whether it was a neon pair of sneakers or even if it was a pair of sneakers at all. So all I know is you bought Nike, you bought an Adidas, you bought here. You get a kind of picture for somebody. Now, you can do better than that with banking data, and that's kind of where we've seen the evolution in more regulatory type contexts, which are being able to identify somebody's kind of financial demographic and actual financial health directly from their bank account, and that in different markets, so credit, kind of debt markets, enable you to board faster with a different provider and insurer. If you're going for debt and somebody can see like a change in your disposable income or a change in your salary or your financial circumstances, that's really key to kind of personalizing kind of payment. Do you want to pay? Do you typically pay up front? Do you typically pay on subscription? And those types of models. But I think on the like targeted advertising at kind of point of payment, I'm not sure we'll go that far yet until Visa can see the SKU data as well as the actual transaction itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one idea, Jason, as I'm hearing this, is maybe for CAF. We said based on your recent phishing attack history, maybe you lose. We could have a fraud recommendation engine. I'm convinced to do that. Let's move into the fraud prevention bit. That's where a lot of us kind of live, spend time in. One of the buzzwords that's been doing rounds in the industry is fraudster as a service, right? It's like the IKEA of fraud prevention. You can go on YouTube, you can get tutorials. There are Telegram channels. They'll exactly tell you step by step how to commit different types of fraud. And fraudsters love, some of the fraudsters are actually professional fraudsters. That's their livelihood. And there's some of them who just find a way to dupe a company and then they go in and talk about it. So, are we doomed to a world of where crime is easier than canceling a gym membership, or the tech will we eventually outsmart the fraudsters, or is this game going to continue, Jason? Over to you.
To me first, yeah. So look, I think the game of fraud has always been a perpetual cat and mouse game, right? And there's always been a community of fraudsters that have collaborated and kind of worked together. I mean, I'm going to date myself, but way back in like the late 80s, early 90s, there was like online, you could find papers on like posting boards where you could teach you to do various things that might have been, considered to be illegal at the time, right? And so it's always been there. But then what's happened is the internet has just made that more accessible, and then more and more people are available to it. There's money in it, and all AI does is just the next generation of technology that enables it, and it enables the good guys and it enables the bad guys, right? So there's always that arms race aspect of it. I think technology is part of the issue, but it doesn't solve the real problem. The real challenge is data collaboration aligning, and the industry being as organized as fraudsters. The incentive is so strong on the fraud side for people that are motivated that way that they're able to kind of really come together and link. Now, industry has an opportunity with technology now to do more and more collaborative things through intelligence sharing, but not necessarily data sharing and elements like that. And so technology enables it on both sides. I think the challenge is going to be on the cultural side. Does industry want to work as closely together on this specific issue, or does everybody want to continue to kind of fight it in silos? I think that's going to be the real challenge. But the cat and mouse game's always been there with you. It'll be there long after we're done playing this game, and I guess that's part of why it's good job security in a way.
Yeah, but we are the mouse, we're not the cat. So James, let's get your perspective.
I mean, look, Jason's right on silos. It's unfortunate that it's like the kind of model of open source, right? If the banks were more aligned with that type of model and shared data across themselves, we'd have a much better chance of kind of stemming fraud. But actually, they don't like sharing data. They're very much like protective about their consumer data because of the regulatory implications of it. So, there is no kind of central body. The closest you get to it is the card networks have their own fraud networks. They see a lot of transactions. They can stem a lot of things in the bud. But, going back to, age, I remember the Anarchist Cookbook. I also remember.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. I didn't want to say it, but that was exactly where I was going, James. Yeah.
I don't think you meant to mention that anymore. It used to be completely illegal, didn't it? Yeah, it's a good read, that one. Anyway, let's leave that one alone. But I remember back in the days of like Moroccan markets and going, on holiday with my folks in Africa, and you would have click-clack machines to read your credit card, and the people sat with Visa from the corner, they'd get out these big yellow pages type books, and they would look up your credit card in it and see if it was still valid. And that was basically the check in the 70s. And we've wound that all the way forward to see, is there any other kind of checks? And that's kind of where you're coming in from. Is it a known IP to you? Is it a known location? Are you paying at a stupid time in the morning? And all those things collectively that say that card shouldn't be used at that kind of moment in time. But fraud as a service has grown over the years. It's nothing particularly new. You used to be able to go on the dark net and there'd be lists of every type of phishing, hacking tool possible. You could buy the tools, you can rent the tools, you can rent the service, and they were cheap. I mean, at one point when I was at WellPay, we were looking at places like Mr. Bin and Alphabet, and there were two places where you could effectively buy lines of credit card numbers on Match. You could even search for credit cards or debit cards by bank, by region. It was literally that sophisticated. I'm sure they've come a long way.
I mean, they have better UX. Yeah, they have these fraud prevention marketplaces, better UX. You can get stuff. There is help centers. So obviously, yeah,
it looks better than the bank. It's amazing. Yes. The bank just looks like it gets in the way. I mean, if you ever tried to get cash out of a bank, their strategy for preventing fraud is just make you stand there for 40 minutes while they give you a diatribe why you shouldn't be withdrawing cash from the bank, and then give it to you anyway. I mean, we've just been through a house build, which is all cash to everybody, and the amount of time I spent in banks trying to get my own money out as a fraud prevention mechanism for them was ridiculous.
Awesome. And so let's move to the next buzzword. And I think we've been bullish on all of these trends. So that seems like I think we're moving in the right direction from a buzzword perspective. Generative AI is the Swiss Army knife of scammers, phishing emails, deepfakes, and synthetic identities, all at the click of a button, right? So will fraud prevention tools evolve fast enough, or are we looking at a future where your digital doppelganger takes out a mortgage on our names? So are we just moving into this world where fraud is happening? Is it a dystopian future, or do you think fraud prevention is evolving? Jason, let's start with you.
Yeah. So look, I think, look, I don't know that I can say I'm 100% bullish on this, right? Because what I do think is going to happen is, I do think AI is such a revolutionary component, right? So when I think back to earlier this year, it was something that we heard in boardrooms or at private equity conferences, things like that. Then in the course of 2024, it became a really big integral part of how we operate as a business, right? So the pace of change is coming quick, but like organizations' ability to adopt the change and bring in these tools is going to depend on their level of pain and exposure to the problem, right? And so I do think that as you see this evolve, I think you're going to see the fraudsters probably evolve quicker in the beginning, and then industry is going to kind of race around to catch up. So I don't know that we're heading to a dystopian future, Vanita. I don't really see it that way. I just do think it's just another leveling up and another learning curve for the industry to kind of get behind.
James, what are your take on this?
I mean, look, I think I said it's an arms race, right? So there's a limit to what AI can do right now. We're starting to hit a ceiling for it. I think Google's CEO came out today or yesterday and said, we're starting to see that ceiling being hit. You're finding businesses that actively look for deepfakes, that actively look to spot AI in imagery and in text, both for plagiarism and anti-fraud use cases. So I think we'll find at some point it becomes an equal suite of weapons, and some people will be confused, defrauded, but actually in a kind of monetary context, the tools will be there to defend yourself pretty quickly.
All right. So let's kind of get into, James, from a payments perspective. We talked about generative AI, everything being faster, tip of a fingertip. There's another big trend that's coming in real-time payments, right? It promises instant transfers, offering convenience for consumers and businesses alike. But as you look at it in light of the changing fraud trends, are real-time payments the future of seamless transactions, or the rush to instant transfers creating more problems than it solves, right? You're big on payment innovation at Yaspa, so tell me a little bit about what you think about this trend.
I mean, effectively, that's kind of what we do. We do real-time payments, and real times, it's never like 0 seconds. It's a handful of seconds to move messaging as quick as possible. But there's been panacea for some time. We all know cards aren't instant, and we know that bank transfers, certainly in Europe, have historically taken like 2 or 3 days. So the promise of moving money in 2-3 seconds is heaven. However, the quicker you move money, the quicker it is to defraud somebody. And we're seeing a number of trends. We're seeing like push payment kind of frauds and scams. That's less about a product like us, where you've got two trusted parties. You've got a merchant requesting money from a consumer. The merchant's trusted, the consumer trusts the merchant. We intermediate, the money's made. The challenge is more when somebody's defrauded over the phone, or somebody's handed like something to pay. We see that all the time in the UK with like customs taxes, delivery notes. Like, you've been charged £10 for customs clearance because of Brexit. Pay here. You click on it. You go to something that looks like Hermes, but it's not Hermes. It's Hermes with a 5. You pay it, and then you realise you didn't have a parcel in the first place. I think the more we've moved towards strong customer authentication over the years has been super, super important. So going from a pull payment, which is a card acquirer intermediating between kind of the merchant and the consumer's bank, is one thing, but there's no identity on that transaction. There's no intent for a consumer. There's just a set of card details. In kind of instant payments or account to account payments, you're essentially directing the consumer into their mobile banking app and then asking them to authenticate it using biometrics. There couldn't be a stronger way to prevent fraud than that, but that assumes the merchant and the consumer are both in a trusted transaction. We didn't have SCA in the UK for quite a while. It was supposed to roll out 2019 under PSD2, and it took 4 more years from there, which is inherently surprising. SCA for a long time was SMS OTP in the UK, which is inherently unsecure. Coinbase users were getting hacked by secondary authentication, getting hacked, and kind of cell towers being snooped and all kinds of nonsense. So the welcome and promise of biometrics at point of payment is what's going to make this work.
So you are cautiously bullish on this trend.
I'm massively bullish on it.
All right.
Yeah.
Jason?
I mean, so not to be too aligned with James, but I agree. Like, obviously, we operate a lot in Brazil, Vanita. We see the success of Pix, right? It's remarkable. It's one of those rare examples where you see a central bank regulation that generated really positive results, and it's had big economic impact. I mean, when you got to think about like financial inclusion, the ability to easily move money opens the global economy to so many more individuals, but obviously it comes at a cost. So whereas, exactly as James says, cards are very comfortable for, let's call it North America, Europeans, kind of the Western society, because it's so easy to use. There's so many consumer protections. So the downside to that, the dark side of that coin, is first-party fraud and refund abuse and things you see that happen inside that card network environment. In the real-time payment side, it's exactly as James says, right? The real risk is around once the money moves, it's gone, right? And there's real risks in that. My mother's been scammed, specifically dealing with things like this. Direct consumer bank is a lot of like social engineering work that comes into this. There's a lot of companies that are specialized in identifying the scams, taking it down. There's going to be more regulations putting banks to have higher levels of responsibility on this. So there's going to be quite a few changes that are coming along with this this aspect of it. But I think it's exactly as James says, it's going to come down to technology, identity, really good consumer validation, and then once that's in place, then how the money moves is just the back end mechanic, right? And I think when you look back at the credit card network, nobody would ever design it that way today. It was designed that way when it was built, right? And now technology is enabling us to move into a much more dynamic payment system. But that ultimately means it's going to be all about identity, all about authentication on the front end.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so the next one, let's get into identity infrastructure. I think, James, you talked about identity is the core of payments. Jason, CAF is at the forefront of identity. So one of the buzzwords that keeps getting thrown around is self-sovereign identity. It lets you control your identity like a boss. No central authority, no big tech gatekeepers, no big brother. It's built on blockchain. And so, let's start with you, Jason. Are you bullish, or are you calling BS on this, right? Is the future of privacy, or is it like owning a Tesla without any charging stations?
Any charging stations or a power grid strong enough to support all the
Yeah.
Teslas that are being required to be bought, right? Exactly. So that was a little California joke there for you, Vanita. So look, I think the reality of it is it's all going to be about identity going forward, right? I mean, just look at the simplicity in the US of being able to walk into a Whole Foods and I just put my palm over a reader and it brings up my wallet and I pay, right? I don't have, so like Apple Pay was an evolution of moving into that aspect of it. This is another form of biometry identity. There's now that also can exist in the online and mobile channels as well. I seamlessly being able to identify who an individual is the gateway to any number of transactions, right? And so I do believe that identity becomes the precursor for how all payments occur. I think it's where you'll see value differentiation, personalization, better user experiences. And I do see identity and payments fusing together. And you're already seeing big players in the industry making these moves, but this is the future where this is all heading.
And James, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the history of this business is that's the first product we actually built, and we tested it with the banks and we built our own crypto stack. Nobody cares. Nobody cares enough to self-manage their own identity. Privacy is a fallacy online. We all know it's driven by data. Everyone's come to accept that thing. The failure of GDPR in Europe and subsequent kind of failures in the US of anyone really wishing to kind of get their teeth out and kind of regulate how identity is used, I think is a demonstration of nobody really has the appetite to care where their data is en masse. There's always a slice of the population. I'm very privacy conscientious, but there's nothing I could do about that. Who just called me, damn it. Apologies for that. But I do think that in the future, kind of key management and how you unlock aspects of your data can be controlled by you. I just don't think it's self-sovereign in the context of your own personal blockchain or a shared kind of blockchain network where everyone holds their ID. I think there's like India or Estonia all have digital ID systems. I think that's about as far as you're going to get in the space. The UK is definitely not going to tolerate it because we still think back to the days of the war. As soon as someone says a centralized ID system, the UK just freaks out. So I think you're going to find different opinions in different countries, but self-sovereign in a privacy context, I don't think anyone cares.
So if the question was self-sovereign, Vanita, I completely agree. That's a BS trend. That's not a bullish trend, right? Is identity the form of payment that ultimately is identity key to what makes payments work? Bullish. Self-sovereign, I agree with James. There's a long way for technology to get for consumers to care enough to want to manage their credentials. I agree.
And actually be able to manage their credentials as well, right? If you look at the best model is probably how people manage their own crypto wallets. And getting somebody to manage a private key for their crypto wallets is hard enough. And then getting them to do it a little bit better by carrying around a ledger or something like that. It's such a small amount of people that can actually get their heads around public key cryptography. They just don't get it, and they won't get it. And even kind of people of the 2-3 generations behind me, the 20-year-olds, they don't get cryptography, and that's your only solution for it right now. And the only way you could kind of make PKI better is maybe generating a private key from identifiers in your genes. But then somebody could take your genetics and replicate it. So I don't quite know where you go with it. It's a clunky mechanism, and I just don't think anyone has the time or effort to deal with it.
I agree. Very academic, makes a lot of sense, but I think you put in the human behavior, the overall infrastructure, and it's probably not not ready. And I'm glad we got a first BS trend because I was starting to get worried. Let's talk about decentralized identity, right? I mean, is that a scalable solution? So we did talk about identity being important. Obviously, identity is the key. You can replicate, you can get a new payment card, you can get a new bank account, but your identity stays the same, right? So your digital identity getting corrupted is a big deal. Decentralized identity, James, let's start with you quickly. Bullish, BS?
Between two, I still believe in tokenizing identity for kind of representation elsewhere. I don't think you should have to get out your passport every single time you want to identify yourself. I think there should be abilities to kind of unlock that. And I think the model's already there with the way we kind of tokenize credit and debit cards at the moment. You present at a site that you've seen before, you already have your credit card information, and you unlock it with your CVV. I think there's probably a mechanism there for unlocking maybe your identity with a trusted merchant, with a combination of a code and your date of birth or something like that. You've already got elements of that online within government networks. I had to actually insure my car the other day, and I had to go in and get that shareable link in the UK where you get your driver's record and your penalty points by providing your national insurance number, your address or postcode, your date of birth. And those three things together give you enough information to share with an insurer. That's essentially fragmented tokenized identity, right? And then you take that link and you give it to somebody else that you trust. So I think there's lots of applications for that. It doesn't need to be on the blockchain. It doesn't need to be crypto, but certainly representation of identity is a recurrent theme. And we're already doing an element of that with AVS in the card network. So yeah, definitely a thematic thing for the future.
Jason?
So I'm bullish on decentralized data applications, not necessarily on decentralized identity, right? And so I think that's where you're kind of getting into a little bit of a nuance, right? Because I think when you get into the term decentralized identity, you're getting into that self-sovereign kind of component, right? And as James rightly said, there's all kinds of good examples where, hey, look, I've seen this device before, so I can tokenize it. And I know that when it comes back in, we don't need to represent, and we're okay, right? That's fine. But where I do think there's a lot of applications that filter into identity is back to where you can use decentralized applications and ways for industry to start to collaborate, right? So how can you bring together the collective knowledge of multiple groups in a scalable way to where they can use common data trends, attributes, etc., to drive a better overall identity experience? I'm really bullish on that. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity across multiple use cases, many use cases in the near future. So it's a little bit of a nuanced answer, Benita. I'm not trying to be too.
Yeah. So identity infrastructure overall, I think identity is going to be the core to a lot of use cases, but the buzzwords around identity infrastructure, I think, seem a little premature, and you're both calling BS on that. All right. So there's something else that, when I first joined the industry, we started talking about. You had 3 different ICP. So how do you sell to all of them? You say they are converging. And one such buzzword was fraud, security, financial crime are converging, right? People have talked about it for years. The converging, merging, much like a super app wants to, every app wants to be a super app. You're saying like the same trends, the same prevention, fraud prevention, security, attack, mitigation scenarios can apply, right? So is the convergence real? Is it key to tackling crime holistically, or are we just throwing buzzwords at complex problems? Jason, let's start with you.
I think that's kind of BS, right? I think you still have a lot of silos inside organizations and how people kind of buy and look at solutions. So like in my experience, when you're dealing with let's say a bank or an e-com, merchant, the buyers for fraud and payment solutions are not always the buyers for security solutions. They're very, very independent, right? And there is overlap between where those worlds collide and touch, but they're not always that integrated. And I find that, you could have a CISO off running his or her vision and dream, and that's completely independent of where kind of the fraud, the payments folks are operating. And they're not typically always kind of moving together, and that's even more true and the bigger the organization gets. So I don't think so. And if you talk to any big UK bank, any big US bank, man, the left hand rarely knows what the right hand's doing. So even inside an organization, there's opportunities to bring those groups more together to make better decisions. That's part of that. That's part of that bureaucracy. That's part of that collaboration I was talking about earlier. So no, I don't really see that, Vanita. I think you're full of crap.
Okay. What about you, James?
I'm not going to call you full of crap, but they're all very different silos and different requirements within an organization. If we look at anything from an online trading business to an online gaming business, the difference between money laundering and frauds and arbitrage and bonus abuse, they're all segmented parts of the organization. KYC is one thing, so knowing who you are before you get an account, then knowing your financial health is something else, and then knowing when you make a payment that you've made a payment from James's bank account rather than some Russian's bank account, preventing anti-money laundering, knowing that the money you're paying out is going to the same person, knowing that that person's financial health has changed. Oh, financial health can change to the positive. Where's that 200,000 come from in your account? Why are you depositing large amounts of money? Who are you? Are you the same person that registered for this account? Is that coming from the same place? Maybe it's not. Account rental is a very, very big thing in these markets, both in crypto and in gaming. So they're hyper specialized the bigger the organization becomes. So conversion of one big bucket cauldron of witchcraft of financial crime, I think, yeah, that's bullshit.
But what about from a fraudster's perspective? The fraudsters don't give a crap about the
different
silo.
types of fraud, though. Much different types of fraud, right? So getting bonuses or some financial reward out of a gaming firm is a very specific targeted attack. Very different from Vlad the Russian trying to rinse $500,000 through a gaming account by renting an account through me. Very different things to look at. Some is identity, some is transactional history, some is very short amounts of time, 10, 20 seconds. Some of it will happen over like 3 days, 3 weeks, couple of months, right? Small trickle amounts rather than large amounts that look like outliers. And there's whole teams that do this in these organizations, and they're very, very specialized.
Right. So what I'm hearing from you is it depends on the industry, right? In certain industries, the silos, in a banking world, the crime looks very different than fraud, whereas in certain areas it could just be a combined and it's one particular use case that covers both of them.
If you're in a bank, the department that looks at like authorized push payment fraud is very different from a team that looks at fake IDs, for example, because they're completely two different disciplines. And also transaction monitoring is not just about singular transactions, it's about transactions over time, over history, and value. So if you look at any bank, there are very specific divisions dedicated to all these different types of crime.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about biometrics and privacy. That's the other thing that keeps coming out. It's a security, it's convenience. You can forget passwords, but you can just scan your face. Are biometrics the holy grail of authentication, or a Pandora's box of privacy nightmares?
Oh, that's a great question.
Look at it. Go on, Jason.
Yeah, I think it can go. That's a tough one, because I don't know that it's a holy grail, right? I think it becomes a really important tool, but it does absolutely bring some real risks associated with privacy. But look, as an example of operating in Brazil. Brazil uses a tremendous amount of biometrics, right? And even if you're looking at what's recently happening with ID.me and what the IRS is doing there with some of the integrations that are there, you can look at walking onto an airplane for United. They're now scanning my face. Global Entry is now taking more and more pictures of me. We're kind of moving in very quickly in those spaces. So the reality of it is biometrics are here to stay, right? They're going to evolve. They'll fraudsters find ways to beat them, and regulators and industry will find ways to make sure that people can kind of maintain their elements of privacy. But there's no way of getting around it. Biometry is going to be a very, very important way to continue to drive security in all these transactions.
Yeah, agree with that. I mean, in a privacy context, it's how that data's used, and is it transferable? But both in a fraudulent context and also in a straight up privacy context, is that data exposing to you if your Face ID is taken and put somewhere else? That's kind of one thing. There has been lots of misapplications of that technology in the UK where the police were using it around King's Cross indiscriminately without any consent from everyone. That created quite a big kind of hoo-ha within the public. But nobody really talks about Face ID and Touch ID on a mobile phone. That's not shared biometrics. That's essentially you use biometrics on the device itself to unlock a key, and that private key exists on a secure enclave of your phone, and that private key is then used to unlock aspects of your data that may not be on the phone or used to sign data, right? So it's like having your personal key, but behind the lock that is your face. I think I'm more comfortable with that. I think the notion of a Google or an Apple actually breaching kind of trust and sharing that kind of data is very, very slim. I'm more worried about the kind of the police type context, the big data firms out there that may use that for differing purposes. I mean, look, China's got gait analysis. It doesn't even do face and fingerprints. It looks at how you walk. You're not going to avoid that anywhere in public. So here to stay, will be ubiquitous. Trust where you use it and object to it where you think it's an overreach.
All right, I think this has been a great discussion. Before we end, let's kind of talk about one trend that we didn't talk about, James. Let's say we're having this conversation in December of 2025. What is a trend that you think we'd be talking about and we said we didn't see it coming? Maybe you see it coming.
That's a tough one. I mean, the business that we're in, we're connecting identity and money, and we believe kind of verifiable money and financial health at the point of payment is something that not a lot of people do. I think there's, particularly in things like, we started this conversation with, buy now, pay later, like really understanding somebody's financial health and predicament in a circumstance before they pay, I think is really relevant. To target them with, better, more personalized, relevant services and products, but actually stopping you consuming others because you don't have the financial means. And I think we, over time in the payment space, have definitely gone further and further away from responsible money. I think coming back to responsibility within payments will be an emergent trend over the coming years.
Jason?
So look, I think it's going to be, I think we're going to see more and more elements of data collaboration coming together to drive a lot of these kind of financial and identity-based decisions, right? I think that technology's evolved in such a way, and there's so many new dynamics that are coming into space that I think that's going to be an area where you're starting to look for industry, starting to try to find solutions on how to address that, because it helps solve a lot of these kind of challenges that we've identified today. So I don't hear people talking about that, but I do think that's what's coming. I think when you get into kind of small closed door rooms and you have some chats, people are trying to figure out how to do this. But I do think that's kind of where I do think we're going to see a big movement towards that.
So we have a few questions from the audience. Let's take two of them quickly. The first one is for you, James. Is using payment data a viable component of identification?
So there's several aspects of identity, isn't there? So there's the person that owns the instrument that makes the payment. So that's James Neville of 1 Long Street, London. And then there's the kind of financial health or the kind of demographic imprint of that individual by virtue of their previous transactions. And I think that's something you can classify better than exists online right now. There's a lot of postcode lottery within the kind of credit reference agencies. If I'm from, postcode N1, then I have relatively good credit because it's a good area of London. If I'm from OF2 in the north somewhere, then the postcode lottery says that I don't have much money because I live in a rough area of the north of England. Now, that's just not objective. It's not real. I could be the richest person in the world living in the worst place in the UK. And I think actually looking at transaction information to determine your disposable income, what you transact with and where you transact with and with who. I think is super important. I think all of that has to be shrouded in purpose. It has to be shrouded in consent. It's not something I would open-endedly give to an Amazon, for example, but in a lending context or a kind of buy now pay later type context, or I'm depositing money somewhere for exchange of goods and services. I think that kind of financial health is super important, and being able to do that seamlessly at point of payment, I think solves a lot of problems.
Awesome. Thanks, James. And Jason, there are two questions, but I think we can combine them into one. One was around the crypto winter seems to be over. What are some of the fraud trends to expect? And then the second one was about what are some of the key industries that will see fraud accelerate? And so maybe we combine them and let's get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so great question. Look, so for sure, it's really it's the roller coaster of crypto continues, right? So I think there's been some real movements on that, and you're going to continue to see that. So I think you're gonna see it kind of revert back to a lot of some of the same trends we saw back in the original season of crypto leading up into COVID 2018, 2019, 2020, which is just going to be a lot of account takeover, a lot of social engineering, and where you have opportunities to find those easy pathways to gather access to those credentials to be able to move that money. You're going to continue to kind of see that. I think you're going to continue to see, in a similar vein, anywhere you have opportunities for account takeover, right, and the ability to get credentials after you've been authenticated, after you've already been onboarded, through social engineering, through scams, through some of the links we've talked about. I think you're going to continue to see that be a really big trend in 2025. Hard to say that. I can't believe we're actually in 2025, but yes, we are.
We are in 2025, and again, there are so many moving pieces, right? We're on the precipice of a lot of changes. So, and that brings us to the end of today's session on Bullish or BS, tackling the top trends in identity and payments in 2025. A huge thank you to our incredible panelists, Jason Howard of CAF and James Neville of YASPA, for sharing their insights, predictions, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Although I would have liked a little more skepticism. Your perspectives have given us a lot to think about as we navigate the fast-changing world of identity, payments, and fraud prevention. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Whether you're bullish on these trends or calling BS, it's clear that 2025 is shaping up to be a year of innovation and challenges. Thanks once again, and stay tuned for other interesting content from both CAF and YASPA. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks, James. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.